Okay, good morning, sixth grade. So today we've got our last little bit of new material in our Imperial China. When we talk today, we're going to talk about the Ming Dynasty. All right. So yesterday we left off with talking about a dynasty that was brought in by the Mongols in ancient China. And so that would have been the Yuan Dynasty that was brought about by the Mongols. I remember Kublai Khan. Genghis Khan's grandson was the one that kind of like took it on and kind of ruled everything, right? Unfortunately, whenever we talk about what happens after Kublai Khan dies, the Yuan dynasty kind of declines and falls apart. So we're going to talk about why, and then we're going to talk about the dynasty that came after that. So you'll have 3 questions to answer today, only 3. And then at the end of the video, I will show you real quick what it looks like outside on campus because it's empty and barren. All right. So we have the Yuan dynasty, and Kublai Khan dies, just like everybody else does. And unfortunately, the Yuan dynasty starts to decline and fall. And it happens for a number of reasons. We have the fact that they have a bunch of weak emperors that take over. Okay, that's one. So after Kublai Khan, we have a bunch of weak emperors that aren't necessarily the best at leading. They don't make the best decisions. And so they don't kind of help that much. After that, we've got they spend a lot of money on foreign campaigns and military expeditions and stuff like that. So remember the Mongols, massive land empire. They want to keep expanding it. They're trying to go out and conquer as much as they can. So they're spending a lot of money on that, which takes money out of the treasury for the country of China. And then on top of that, we start to have corrupt officials in the Yuan dynasty steal from the government. All right, they start to steal money from the treasury, steal money from China itself. So all of these things loop together over the next 70-ish years, kind of start to have the Chinese people, the native Chinese people that live there, lose a lot of respect for the Yuan dynasty, as is understandable, right? If this new people come in from outside of town and they take over, and then they start spending all your money on exploration and war campaigns, they take your, like, people are literally stealing your money out of your treasury, and you have bad leaders, of course the people aren't going to like them, okay? So then we have a gentleman by the name of Zhu Huanzhang, actually comes in 1368, and he reunites the country and becomes emperor. Whenever he reunites the country together, he was a military commander, so that's how he did it. He did it through military conquest. He takes the name, or takes the title of emperor, and he moves the capital to Nanjing, which you can see in your book. If you look at it, it's kind of closer to the coast, right there. Okay. He moves the capital to Nanjing, and he founds and establishes the Ming Dynasty. And what that roughly translates to is the Brilliant Dynasty. Okay. And this dynasty lasted for about 300 years. So it's lasted 3 times as long as the Mongol dynasty did, which is pretty impressive. So he took the name, whenever he took the title of emperor, he took a new name called Hongwu, which literally means military emperor. All right. He reunited everybody. He was a military officer, so he takes the new name of Hongwu, which means military emperor. All right. He was very untrusting of everybody. I think your book says, he trusted few people and punished officials that he suspected of treason or disloyalty to the government. So if you got on his bad side, all right, probably not going to be a good thing. So once he passes away, he dies. His son takes over just 30 years later in 1398. And his name was Young Li. And he kind of had it in his mind that he was going to be this awesome, successful, powerful ruler. Okay. And he started to do a lot of things. So his dad had just moved the capital to Nanjing. And so he moves the capital even farther north. So there's Nanjing, all the way up to Beijing. All right. Up north, all right? And that's where he moves the capital to, and there he builds the Forbidden City, which is still a real thing today. You can go if you want. Once all this is over and people are allowed to travel freely, if you ever find yourself in China, in Beijing, you can visit the Forbidden City, which was built as a massive palace, really a collection of palaces that only the royal family was allowed into. Okay, your book, let's see, There, he moved the capital north to Beijing. There, he built the imperial city, a large area of palaces and government buildings. And in the center was known as the Forbidden City, which is where the emperor and his family lived. Only top government officials were allowed to enter the Forbidden City. So he moves the capital to Beijing. He builds this massive thing there called the Imperial City, which is full of palaces and buildings, government buildings. And then in the inside, which I said, the Forbidden City, is where the emperor and his family live. So you have the Imperial City and then the Forbidden City inside, and you can actually go visit that in today's time, which is pretty cool. The emperors and everybody after them lived in that city for 500 years. All right. So the Forbidden City that is in China that you can go visit has been around longer than the United States has been a country. All right. So that's pretty cool if you think about it in like comparison of time. All right. So, we 1776 to now, 250, 300 years, they've been living in the city for 500 years. All right. So it's kind of cool to put things in perspective. So whenever the Ming take over China, they actually do a lot of good things for China itself. Remember when we're coming out of the Yuan dynasty from the Mongols, right? The Mongols had the Yuan dynasty, and then they start to decline. They have bad rulers. They're spending a lot of money, and people are stealing money. The Ming dynasty comes in, and they actually start to do a lot of good things. So they bring back the civil service examination. Right? Remember, that's a really hard, really long test that you have to study for years to be able to do, or to be able to pass, really. And that kind of gets you able to have a job in the Chinese government. Okay. So it was really important. They brought back the civil service examination. And then they also began to carry out, or the government officials had to carry out, what we call a census. Census would have been one of your vocabulary words that we would have looked at, and it's a count of the number of people in a country. Now, I wanted to point that out because the census is also going on right now in our country. All right, I've gotten a notification in the mail that I need to fill out my census, and ask you your basic information, who's living in the house, address, all that stuff. But it also helped identify who owed taxes to the government so they could help get that revenue in. So they brought back, or they started counting, or having a census, which is counting the number of people in the country and finding out who owed taxes. They bring back the Chinese civil service examination to have stronger, more qualified people in the government. And then it gives everybody kind of this sense of peace and safety and security. They were going through this really bad time. Now this new ruler's taken over and everything's going great, right? That people aren't stealing money anymore. Our government officials have to be tested to be there. And we're getting hold on everything. They also did a lot of good things to help the people and to help the economy of China. It says your Ming rulers, where is it? So starting with Hongwu, he rebuilt many canals and farms, ordered new roads to be paved and new forests planted, and agriculture began to rise. So now it's important that he looked and he decided that they've kind of gotten rid of a lot of their forest and decimated their land ecologically. And so he wanted to fix that. So he had them plant new forest, came up with new agricultural ways of farming. One of those was they introduced a new rice, or new types of rice from Southeast Asia below them that grew faster and was easier to take care of. And so they're able to have better farming techniques. They start to take care of the land. And let's see, it also says that they repair and expand the Grand Canal, which helps with transportation between the major rivers. And then I think that's it for that. But the big thing that helps with that, so we repair our land, we start working on better farming techniques, we have better crops. Well, if we have more food available, that means that we can support a bigger population. So with all of these good things that the Ming Dynasty is doing, all right, they're actually caring about their government. They're starting to care about their environment. They're working on their agriculture. They're able to grow more food easier. They start to see who all is actually there to get the tax money in for revenue. They start to work on building projects like canals and roads. And so Chinese culture and economy as a whole starts to improve greatly, right? Their economy and their wealth, right, goes up a lot, okay, which is a really good thing we see. So I talked about agriculture, which helps with population. They also cared about trade, and they encouraged silk trade and production, but they also encouraged the growing of cotton and the weaving of cloth, because cotton was something that they had to ship in, and so it cost them money. Now they're encouraging people to do it at home, and they can make their own, which is cheaper. All right, so they cared about trade, but they also cared about, kind of helping everything else out. Okay. So whenever we talk about, that's kind of like the economy and the agriculture and the trade part of things. But another good thing that happens with the Ming Dynasty is that they start to care about arts and literature. Before, during the Mongol Dynasty, it kind of didn't happen. They really didn't, promote Chinese culture. Remember, I told you the Mongols and the Chinese kind of lived separately and did their own thing. Well, now the Ming are back in, and they are Chinese, so they can help, and they help promote Chinese culture. And so the arts began to flourish, arts and literature began to flourish quite a good bit under the Ming rulers. So we start to have the fact that these people want and do have the money to spend on the arts, right? If you want the arts to happen, you've got to spend money on them. You have to buy the art. You have to have the money for the supplies. You have to encourage theater and writing and all that stuff. So they start to have the money to encourage it, all right? And I'm sorry, your first question that I skipped. First question, what is a census? First question is, what is a census? All right, going on. So they start to have the money to put into being able to do this. Your book says that they could, the artisans wanted entertainment and could afford to pay for printed books and trips to the theater. So very important that they could do that. It talks about books. Well, now that Chinese writers are starting to produce the first novels, which you know what a novel is. It's one of your vocabulary words, and it's a long fictional story. And so we start to see the Chinese people start to produce the first novels that we've seen. It says one of the most popular ones was The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and it described military rivalries at the end of the Han period. So they start to actually put a focus on writing in longer forms instead of just poetry or short oral stories or whatever it is, long written fictional stories, novels. Whenever we talk about what they wrote in, there's a really fancy word of what they wrote in. They wrote in the vernacular, okay? And what a vernacular is it's the everyday local language, all right? The language that the people will understand, okay? So a vernacular is the language that local everyday people will use and understand, all right? So if I was to say, give you an example, whenever we talk about the Middle Ages, all right, medieval times, Dark Ages, knights and plagues and all that stuff, all right, a lot of your scholars and religious people and higher up people would have written and maybe even read, in Greek or Latin, okay, probably Latin. When writers during that time wanted to reach the everyday people in their area, or wanted to write for the people in their area of Italy, France, Spain, whatever it is, they would use the vernacular. They would use the common everyday language of an area. Okay, so that's the vernacular. The vernacular is the common everyday language of an area, all right, instead of like the sophisticated high up. So that was kind of what they wrote in because it helped. All right. Of course, if you write in a language that everyone's going to understand and comprehend, and not something that's super hard and complicated, everybody's going to want to read, and they're going to help you. All right. It says the writers avoided former language to tell their tales. Instead, they tried to make their stories sound as if they had been told aloud by storytellers. Local traditional language. Traditional Chinese dramas had been banned during the years of the Mongol rule, but now the Ming restored drama and theater. Okay, so we see drama and theater come back. We see art, writing, drama and theater all start to make a comeback under the Ming Dynasty. So your second question for today, what is vernacular? What is vernacular? Second question. Pause and answer that. Okay. Now your book goes into a little bit of an explanation about exploration, because they kind of did do some important things, and it was all actually centered around one person named Zheng He. And so the Chinese start to explore or start to grow. Their society comes back out of kind of where it was shut down by the Mongols, and so they're wanting to learn more about everything around them. Okay, so what they do is they start to explore, and the easiest way to do that, most of their coastline or most of their country has a coastline, so they want to explore by sea. Okay, now this is to open up trade, this is to explore new areas, and to bring in tributes. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a second. We did talk about that the other day, and so it comes back up again. That's why I said it was important. So they built a massive fleet of ships, and it even tells you the first voyage they take 28,000 men on 62 large ships and 250 smaller ships. The largest ship was over 440 feet long. That's more than 5 times as long as the ship that Christopher Columbus sailed on. Okay, their ships were massive. They wanted to make a statement. So between a period of about 25 to 30 years, they made about 7 voyages. So 1405 to 1433, they made 7 voyages, kind of exploring the Pacific Ocean, the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, everything basically. The map in your book shows it pretty well. Everything basically, not drawn in this book, around China and down below into the Southeast Asian islands, around the coast of India, Middle East, and even the Horn of Africa. Okay, so they wanted to explore and see a lot of things. Now they traded a lot of stuff. Okay, they traded, let me see if I can get it. So the guy that I told you, the guy that was in charge of this, his name was Zheng He, and he kind of really like went gung-ho all into it. Let's see, he took his first fleet into Southeast Asia, so that's kind of like Indonesia, Polynesia, like that whole area. Your book says he wrote, "We have traversed or traveled more than 30,000 miles of immense water spaces, and have beheld in the ocean huge waves like mountains rising sky high. We have set eyes on barbarian or foreign regions far away, hidden in blue transparency of light vapors, fog, while our sails, loftily unfurled like clouds, day and night, continued their course, rapid like that of a star." It tells you, so whenever he visited, he traded many, 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 many things. Let's see, he traded Chinese goods like silk, paper, and porcelain. We already know that's something that they did. For example, but then he also brought back stuff, like when he visited Africa, he brought back, where was it? Giraffes and other animals that fascinated the Emperor Yongle, who we talked about earlier. He also brought back other people too, so that they could interact and learn their culture. And so whenever he was doing that, he was kind of helping spread and bring everybody into contact in Southeast Asia and African coast with Chinese culture, which is really interesting. And it's a concept that we see happen with trade all the time, that whenever you have 2 countries that trade with each other, not only are they trading, items for things, but they're also going to be trading culture. They're going to be trading ideas. They're going to be trading language, religion, beliefs, all that stuff. There's also a downside to it, but we won't talk about that till we get a little bit later in 9th grade when we talk about the trade of disease and everything. So he actually also encouraged people to start settling in these new areas so that China could have kind of an influence. Unfortunately, Zheng He died in 1433, so 20-something years after he started sailing, 28 years after he started sailing. And they kind of just shut everything down. A lot of people thought they were spending way too much money on these foreign expeditions to go out. Remember, this fleet was massive. Okay. They were spending too much money going on these long voyages. It wasn't worth it. And so after he died, now your book says that they dismantled, took apart all the ships in the harbor and reused it for other stuff. I've read, however, that they just let it sit there and rot to death and didn't do anything with it. So there's 2 different things that could have happened. I'm sure they let some of them sit there. If they had 62 massive ships, 62 large ships and 250 smaller ships, I'm sure both could be true. They probably took some of them apart and used the wood, and some of them they probably couldn't use, and they just rotted and fell apart in the bay. Anyway, once we see that happen, the Chinese don't really put that much into trade outside of their country anymore. Unfortunately, they just don't see the point of it. They see themselves as very self-sufficient. They see themselves as very, we've got our own, we're good. We don't need any outside influence. And that's an idea and a concept that will carry on for hundreds of years, even up into the 1900s, whenever we start to talk about imperialism, which we'll also get into much later, and you will talk about later too. Okay. But they kind of wall themselves off and don't really want to interact with anybody anymore. They try, although they do stop most trading. There is one country that kind of sets up a trading post with China and Southeast Asia, and that would be the Portuguese, which is from Portugal, which sits on the side of current-day Spain. It is a real place. And the Chinese kind of hoped they would just leave if they didn't trade with them. The Portuguese stayed. And so they were the Portuguese were really enticed with China because of the stories written and told by Marco Polo that we learned about yesterday. So the Portuguese wanted to trade with China and convert the Chinese to Christianity. The Ming government paid little attention to the rival Portuguese, and they did not feel threatened by outsiders. They viewed everybody that was not Chinese as barbarians, which was an uncivilized person. So that's a very common thing that will happen up into the 1900s. All right. Whenever you get into my class in 9th and 10th grade, we'll talk about how China was basically forced to open back up. And even in a legal document, they had to agree not to refer to the English as barbarians anymore. Okay. Because they did it in legal documents. So they set up the Portuguese come in, they set up a trading post in the port of Macau in southern China. So see if your map had a picture of where that was. Can't remember if it does. I do not see it, but it is a very important trading post because the Portuguese are now able to trade with China and Southeast Asia and kind of get things to and from. So they become like a main link between everything. Christian missionaries do make it into Chinese government and into China, but they do make it in, of course, through the trade route. The Portuguese bring missionaries over with them because they do want to Christianize the locals. The Christians then find their way into China because they are educated. And the Chinese value the fact that they can provide knowledge of the outside world. They can do things like map making, astronomy, stuff like that. And the Chinese government basically starts to use the Christian missionaries from Europe to their own advantage. And so that's kind of important to point out. It says the Jesuits were highly educated and helped to establish Christian schools in China. Their knowledge of science impressed Chinese officials. However, the Jesuits did not convince many Chinese to accept Christianity. Okay, so the Chinese basically used Christian missionaries for their own advancement, and then that was about it. And then we'll later about how it did not, they basically kicked them out. Because what's going to happen, side tangent, the Pope's going to say that these Christian missionaries basically belong to the Pope, which means the Chinese now belong to the Pope, and that's going to be the last straw for the Chinese. And they say, okay, you're out. All right, so they kick the missionaries back out after they used them to learn all the stuff. So we finally come to the end of the Ming Dynasty. We talked about how the Ming Dynasty was a great period of growth for China, especially after coming into power after the Mongols. But like in any other dynasty, we see corrupt officials start to take control. They start to impose heavy taxes on people, costing them money. And then the farmers that the taxes are put on are going to revolt. And so we kind of see again, remember we talked about this word first time we talked about China, the dynastic cycle. All right. Whenever we talk about, so let's take the Ming Dynasty. The Mongols were in power. They came in, it fell. The Ming Dynasty, new leader comes in, takes control. Things do really, really well. They start to Ming Dynasty China. Ming China starts to improve. Economy goes up. Agriculture goes up. Population goes up. Arts and literature come back. It's going great. It's going great. Bad leaders get into control. They start to make bad changes. Farmers revolt, bad taxes, corrupt people, and then another group of people is going to take over. And they're going to be from northern China in an area that we call Manchuria today. And the Manchus, so what they're called, the Manchus, defeat the Chinese armies and capture the capital of Beijing that we talked about later, where the Forbidden City and the Imperial City are. And they set up a new dynasty called the Qing Dynasty, and that's what comes later. Right? So the Ming Dynasty had the Mongols before the Yuan Dynasty, and after it comes the Qing Dynasty, led by the Manchus. And that's your third question. So what dynasty followed or conquered the Ming Dynasty? That's your third question. All right. That's all today. I will give you a You'll have your practice test tomorrow for everybody to complete, but just submit these 3 questions that I asked in your classwork tab, and that'll be it. If anybody wants to see how barren the classroom looks with all the chairs up and the desk in weird spots, there's no plants everywhere. Everything's just kind of gone and missing. You know, look outside. It's like foggy and weird looking. All right, and nobody's on campus. So anyway, hope everybody has a good day. I will talk to everybody tomorrow or when I give you your take-home test. But other than that, have a good rest of the day. And I hope this weather clears up so everybody can go enjoy the weather outside. All right, I'll talk to you later.